A support weapon in Helldivers 2 is a stratagem that, as the name suggests, should provide critical support to you in your mission to deliver freedom. In that respect, it should be reliable and capable of dealing damage to the toughest dangers that you face in this game and ultimately clear your path towards success. So, deciding which support weapon to put in your loadout is one of the most important choices you will need to make. But which of these support weapon stratagems are the best and which are the worst? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I hope to find out. In this video, I will discuss each support weapon stratagem and rank them on a tier list, with S being the best and Poop8 being the worst. But not just one tier list, two tier lists, because each of these weapons rankings will vary greatly depending on whether you are facing off against the Terminids or the Automatons. Starting with the MG43 machine gun. And this is a medium armor penetrating, fully automatic rifle with a large mag size. It can be good for clearing the horde for sure, all the way from the little guys up to the level of the spewers. And the addition of even more ammo to the mag definitely helps a great deal in clearing the field further. Chargers and Titans though, it is actually pretty bad against, requiring you to go for the weak spots, and it takes a lot of bullets to take them out. Impalers though, I do think they do pretty well, and so I definitely consider that an upside of this weapon. The main downside is that you do have some recoil to contend with, so you will need to crouch a bit to control that. And this gun also has a very long reload, which you will need to stay stationary in order to perform. And this is pretty hard to do amongst the horde, which is always trying to get you. And since the horde is where you would mostly be using this, I find that it's not the most reliable thing to have with you. The machine gun also kind of sits in the middle between the Stalwart and the heavy machine gun without offering up enough advantages over either of those two, at least not versus the bugs. It's also pretty boring too, so I will be giving it a C versus the bugs. Versus the bots though, I have to say I am a bit surprised at how good this feels. This has medium armor penetration, so that is going to be good against a lot of the bots. And I do like that it has a decent clip size. This allows you to shred through groups of medium enemies like the Devastators and the Berserkers, as well as rip through Strider legs. It's not really going to help getting Hulks head on, but it can take out gunships, although that will take a lot of bullets. The machine gun can also take out factory Striders, but again, a lot of bullets. The bigger mag size though will help with that. It's definitely not the best, but I do love its ability to take out the medium and below enemies, so I will be giving this a B for the bots. Next up is the APW-1 anti-materiel rifle, and this is essentially a high-powered sniper rifle with good armor penetration. And versus the bugs, now you would think this would be a shoo-in for poop tier, given sniping on a bug-infested arena is typically frowned upon. But I do have to say it does have some upsides. While it's probably a waste to use any ammo on the smaller guys, you can do pretty well with the medium ones. You can one-shot the alpha commanders and the hive guards, and I can see this being a pretty good niche use case to have on you, especially if you have something for the smaller horde. You can really use this to just get all the bigger guys out of the picture. It also has the ability to pierce heavy armor, so you can use this for the Chargers and the Bile Titans, although I will say it's not that efficient. I surprisingly did like this for the Impaler though, which I was worried about because staying long range leaves you dealing with tentacles, but as long as you are aware of that and where they are, you can basically circle the Impaler from a distance and snipe him off pretty fast. I didn't even have to consistently hit him in one spot to take him out fully. I do think this can be a niche case, but it's not something you should take too often, and you definitely have some better options. I will be giving it a C versus the bugs. Now, unlike the bugs where the anti-materiel rifle only has a few cool advantages, with the bots, this gun is amazing. You face bots at range, which puts this in a good spot already, as you can snipe basically everything. And I mean everything. Striders, Berserkers, Devastators, even gunships, even Hulks, even factory Striders as well can be taken out pretty nicely. And given you do get a decent amount of ammo, you can basically use this as some sort of an overpowered primary, leaving your actual primary to just be there to take on the little guys or anything really close range. I do have to say this excels versus the bots, so I will be giving it an S tier. Now for the M105 Stalwart, which is a light armor penetrating machine gun with a large mag size and the ability to reload while moving. And versus the Horde, it does very well. It clears enemies super fast, it has great handling, it has a very decent mag size, and unlike the other machine gun support weapons, you can actually reload while running. This is light armor penetrating though, so you will have a harder time versus enemies like the Hive Guards. Versus the elite enemies, this will do okay. Versus the Charger, it's limited to its underside and its butt. Versus the Impaler, it does pretty well if you sustain fire on him. You can take them out quickly, and while you can take down a Bile Titan, I don't really recommend it as it will take a while. And honestly, this isn't really a heavy support weapon, so I would definitely have something else for you for those more elite enemies. The use case for the Stalwart is really a bit more niche, as it can essentially serve as a primary weapon replacement, especially if your primary is something that is slower firing or explosive like the Eruptor. And certainly while the Stalwart is probably one of the best assault rifles out there, given it takes up this stratagem slot and is really mainly useful in more niche cases, it may not really offer enough oomph to really be a game changer for you on the battlefield. So I will give this a B versus the bugs. Now for the bots, this is pretty horrible. While it feels nice on the small guys and it can take the Hulk sinks out pretty quickly, the main drawback here is it's only light armor penetrating. As a result, you are left only able to go for weak spots on some of the enemies, while other enemies are just not able to be hurt by you at all. Better handling does help though in trying to get those weak spots, but it still feels like pretty much a complete waste. Like this is not really bringing enough value for you to take up an entire stratagem slot. This is poop tier, get flushed. All right, next up is the EAT-17 expendable anti-tank, which is an expendable rocket launcher with a very quick cooldown time and 2 launchers each time it's called down. And this is great. This really excels versus the more elite enemies being able to take chargers out in as little as 1 hit, and Titans and Impalers as well, given your aim doesn't suck. And this honestly makes it very powerful. The beauty of this is that you can pretty much call this down at will, rather than like most stratagems where you would need to try to stay alive and keep it with you, or if you do die, have to run around and try to pick it up. The cooldown for this is so fast that even if you miss or you do die or whatever, you can always call a new one down soon. Another cool thing this allows for is it basically allows you to act as a secondary support weapon or a group shared one, as it does drop down 2 of these bad boys, and so you can just either share it with a teammate, or if you have your main support, you can just swap it out real quick, fire these guys off, and then grab your main support back. This can be especially useful if your main support weapon isn't that great of an elite killing weapon, but you could also use it in tandem with something like the Qasar Cannon to make up for the slower cooldown charge up time between shots for that gun. Now honestly, versus the Horde, it won't do too much as there isn't a ton of splash damage, but the beauty of this gun is, well, you could just go ahead and use it on something relatively small because the cooldown is so quick you can get another one pretty soon. All in all, I will say this is pretty amazing, very versatile, and so I will be giving it an A. Now versus the bots, this is also pretty solid, being able to take out large structures and bigger enemies like the Hulks, the gunships, the fabricators, and the tanks with just 1 shot. And factory striders quickly as well, as long as your aim doesn't suck. And I don't know about you, but I do tend to die a lot more frequently on these bot missions to things like crazy rockets and a lot of ragdolling. So not needing to run into danger and try to pick up my support weapon is pretty nice. Instead, I can just spawn one of these on me, fire it off, and with a quick cooldown, spawn it again. I will give this an A for the bots. Next up is the GR8 Recoilless Rifle, which GR8 says great. I just realized that. But this is an anti-tank rocket launcher similar to the EAT, but with a backpack for ammo and programmable ammo to switch between splash and anti-tank damage. You can expect to down heavy enemies very quickly, such as the Impalers very quickly, the Chargers, and the Titans. Now, anti-tanks are not really the best for the Horde, as they typically are more precise, high damage shots, so even firing into the crowd won't net you that much, but that is where you can program this ammo to have a wider spread. And I will say it does do that versus the Horde. You will notice the difference, but it might not be as great of a spread as you might hope. And given you do have a limited ammo for this, I don't really think you're going to want to primarily use it for that purpose, but it is a nice option to have, of course, if you get in a pinch. But just remember to be careful to switch back if you need to face off against an elite, because it does seem to do less concentrated damage, which wasn't enough to take out this charger. Another thing with the Recoilless though is that it is considered a backpack stratagem in that you do need to carry your ammo for it on a backpack. And unless you can find some patsy to carry your bag around for you and follow you around reloading your ammo, you're gonna end up being the one losing a backpack spot to take this out. Now, this does allow you to carry multiple bullets as opposed to the EAT with its single use. But one thing that does make it harder versus the bugs is with a backpack stratagem, if you die, you now have to pick up 2 items, and this can be hard versus the horde. I mean, best practice is to wait for the area to actually be clear before trying to pick it up, but still sometimes you can make a risky play to pick your stratagem up in the midst of the horde, and that's doable when it's 1 item, but when it's 2, it's kind of too much. Now, the other thing here is the reload speed, and this is a stationary reload, so you will need to stay still while doing it. Although this does have reload phases, so if you do need to interrupt the reload to get away from an incoming enemy, you can do so, and it will save some of your progress, allowing you to finish it off in another phase. But still, in the heat of battle versus a horde, this can be a pretty big ask. By the time you are clear, you might have been able to call down 2 EATs and not needed to reload at all. Or, as we will talk about the Qasar Cannon, you could have allowed it to auto reload for you. It's a trade-off, and one that for me is not really worth it, unless you can sucker some fool into carrying your backpack, or perhaps if there are 2 of you both wielding the Recoilless Rifle. And even with the versatility of having programmable ammo, it's really not enough for me. So I'm going to be giving this a C versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, this will fare better, mostly because reloading is facing these guys mostly at range, and that makes it easier. All you got to do is just find some cover and you can get a reload in. And given there are a lot more heavily armored enemies on this battlefront, this comes a lot more in handy. It can one-shot the Hulks, it can one-shot the gunships, it can even one-shot the factory striders, which is very nice. The programmable ammo can be used to some effect. If you get a good number of enemies clumped together, you can take multiple out with it, but still, to be honest, I think the ammo is better spent getting rid of a heavy than using it on a group of enemies. It's still good to have the option though, and I do still like this for the bots. I will be giving it a B. Now next up is the Flam 40 Flamethrower, which is a flamethrower. And this is great versus the bugs. The fire damage has been pretty amazing for the bugs since the beginning. Now we did have a little scare for a moment where flames got nerfed and the effectiveness was diminished, but we are so back, baby. The flamethrower destroys the bugs so fast, and you can sweep around dealing damage to everyone and allowing that damage over time effect to kick in. But this is not just good for the general horde. This thing will also melt chargers super quickly, and it will take out impalers very quickly as well. You can even use this on the Bile Titans now, but it won't be that efficient, and you will need to be close, so I wouldn't recommend it. The main drawback of this weapon is honestly your pyromaniac ass may end up damaging yourself and getting yourself on fire, but the fire reduction armor can help a lot, and just be a little more careful with this thing. This is a definite S tier versus the bugs. Now for the bots, the flamethrower I would have expected to be poop tier for sure, but it does have some things going for it. Obviously this will struggle a bit as you need to get in close proximity to enemies in order to use it at all, and closing that gap can be a pain. But what I do like about this the most is that it can take the striders out very quickly. And now that Hulks can actually be damaged by fire, this is also a good option to take them out from the front as well. It's not amazing, but I do like some of these options, so I will give it a C. All right, now for the AC-8 Autocannon, and this one is interesting. This is a fast-firing cannon shooting out these high-damage explosives. And what I like about this is its all-around ability to be decent at everything. Versus the horde, the basic rounds on this thing are pretty weak. Given that you only have a little bit of splash damage with them, they're meant more for precision. But you can program this gun to use flak rounds, and this is absolutely amazing versus the hordes. These rounds basically shoot out shrapnel when they explode, making it essentially a super fast firing eruptor. And this can very quickly kill a lot of the horde. And I really love that you can switch back and forth, programming this gun however you see fit. Like if you run into a heavy enemy while facing the horde, you can go back to the regular rounds for precision and damage. This weapon can also close bug holes if you need it, giving you a pretty solid, fast, and accurate option for those. And the elite enemies such as the Charger, Titan, and the Impaler go down fairly quickly with this thing. This thing also has a decent mag size, meaning you can recover if you end up missing your bullets. The main downside here is you do have to carry a backpack with you, which is a bit of a disadvantage. And the reload is stationary and it can be a little bit slow, although this does reload in 2 separate mags of 5, and so you can get a faster reload in as long as you have at least some bullets in there. If you reload while empty, it will take quite a bit longer, and that can make it hard. So as long as you time that, it's really not that big of a downside. Besides that though, this is just amazing and versatile, being effective versus everything, so this gets an S for the bugs. Now versus the bots, this is also amazing. The ability to fast fire rockets and take everything out feels great. It has great stagger and a great fire rate and can deal with the hulks from the front, can also deal with the striders and the devastators pretty well. Now the flak rounds here are a little bit less noticeable as the bots tend to spread out a little bit more than the bugs, but it's still nice to have that as an option for when they are close together because it can help do damage to a lot. I also love how easily with this the gunships go down because I hate those guys. Now it's not the best for the factory striders, but it still will work for them. Of course, coming at the sacrifice of a backpack slot is a bit of a consideration, but I think it's still worth it. The reloading time here isn't as bad either because it's a little bit easier to deal with that versus the bots. This is going to get an S tier for me. Now for the MG206 heavy machine gun. And this is a very high damaging, high armor penetrating machine gun. And this is a solid option for the bugs. It can be used as a horde clearing device, of course, but it also fares pretty well versus the elites. It can take down a charger from the face pretty quickly, as well as an impaler it can take out pretty quickly. It also has the ability to take a Titan out as well. Its main drawback is honestly the high recoil, so you will want to crouch or prone if you can. And it can sometimes feel like you're running out of bullets fairly quickly, although it has recently received a capacity increase, and it's kind of a good trade-off here. I mean, you are doing very high impactful shots here, so I think it makes sense where it's at. And it also does have a pretty slow reload, which is a pretty big disadvantage, but at least you can interrupt the reload pattern as it has 3 basic phases. I think it's pretty solid, but it's not mind-blowing. It will get a B for the bugs. Now versus the bots, the heavy machine gun surprisingly feels pretty amazing. The damage on this thing is really nice, such that you can tear through just about anyone and do it fast. This also will just absolutely shred hulks without needing to aim that much. Now it does have a lot of recoil to this thing, but what I like to do versus the bots is modify this to slow those RPMs down and pulse fire so that you can use this at range to do things like one-shot devastators from the head. And another thing is this is actually not that bad versus the gunships either, as long as you can control that fire a little bit. Now factory striders, it's not the best, but ammo capacity does feel like it's at a good place for this gun, and this does feel very powerful for anything at the Hulk level or below, so I will be giving this an A versus the bots. Next up is the RL-77 Airburst rocket launcher, which is a rocket launcher that fires in and releases all these horizontal airburst cluster bomb type explosions. And versus the bugs, you would think this would be so cool. And the thing is, it actually can be very cool. It can do things like wipe a horde away, but it's just so inconsistent. Firing this is kind of hard too because you need to be far enough away because the risk of killing yourself to an explosion is very high. But the problem is you usually need to be far enough away that you might even want to assess whether the bugs even know where you are or whether it's worth it to even engage. The explosion that ends up occurring is very similar to the Eagle cluster bomb with this wide horizontal spread of bombs, but honestly it makes me beg the question, why not just use the Eagle cluster bomb instead, because it's just so much better at doing what you want it to consistently, and because you can lay it down and then run away. And this is going to be much more effective because the horde will reliably probably be grouped up and close to you, and you just can't deal with them closely with the Airburst rocket launcher. Instead, you need to be so far away, and as such the horde probably won't be clumped together in a horizontal fashion. It'll probably be more so a vertical one, so it's just not going to always give you the kind of damage you need. And given the autocannon now fires flak, it seems like that might be a better option if you're trying to clear the field, because you can do so with a little bit more consistency. Now, this also isn't going to be very effective versus the elites, and one of the other worst parts about this is the reload speed. Now, it has received a 2-second buff, but that still doesn't feel like enough. And there really isn't any phases to this. Like, you can't really checkpoint your reload, and if you end up needing to dodge away, you save no progress and need to start the animation back from the beginning. This also takes up a full backpack slot, and in all honesty, I just think it's really bad, especially when the Eagle cluster bomb exists. So this is going to get a poop tier, no doubt, for me versus the bugs. Now, versus the bots, I do think this will fare slightly better. It can be nice for doing a lot of starting damage to a bot hotspot, and generally when the bots are clumped up, it can do pretty well. The reloading is very slow, as I've said, but it's much less of a problem as you can often get enough distance and time to get a reload in. It's at least more reliable than versus the bugs. But again, this gun is just not very consistent, and it's hard to know if your shot is going to wreck house or just miss everyone. Generally, if you understand the horizontal cluster pattern, that helps, but it still bounces and other physics occur that make it a really rough science. I also wouldn't expect this to do much for the more elite enemies. It can take out a Hulk, but it struggles versus the factory striders. This is really too much of a wild card, and although it might be slightly easier to wield versus the bots, it definitely doesn't have as much potential as it does versus the bugs, and really it's just not enough. I mean, this still gets a poop hater tier for me. This is bottom of the barrel. Now, next up is the MLS-4X Commando, which fires these missiles that are laser guided, which means after you do fire these missiles, you can use the laser to guide it to your target, which can help with your accuracy. And versus the bugs, it's not really the best choice for the horde, as the explosions are not that great, so even if you shoot into a group, you often will just get one or maybe two. And as far as damage is concerned, this essentially will give you the same damage as an EAT, only it's divided into 4 bullets. So those 4 bullets can take out some of the more elite enemies, such as the Bile Titans and the Chargers, but you do need to get all your bullets on them. I would say this is essentially an alternative to the EAT, although with a slightly longer cooldown, as well as only 1 expendable launcher versus the 2 that you get for the EAT. This could be good if you often whiff your EAT shots, and this allows you to have 4 chances to at least get some damage. And of course, the guided missile aspect does help with the accuracy, although I wouldn't bank too much on it. The missiles do fire fast enough that you really only have time to make small adjustments to your targeting. And so the Commando does have these small advantages, but given that it is less efficient than the EAT, it's hard to really say that those outweigh the advantages of the EAT. And so it's hard to really recommend taking the Commando over it. And so I can't really recommend it too much. I would just give it a C versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, this is an interesting one. It does deal a good bit of damage versus the Striders. It can actually one-shot them, and it can two-shot the Hulks. And I also love that it can one-shot the gunships, and this honestly is the best use case for using the laser guide for your missiles, because these gunships are always flying around. It could be easy to miss them unless you're using your missile to guide you to the target, so I do like it for them. It also does a rougher job versus the factory strider, and the low cooldown that it does have is pretty nice, but it does often feel like you use up your bullets very quickly and that it doesn't have a huge impact on battle. I would give this a C for the bots, but given that it does have a very strong use case versus the gunships, I'll move it up to a B. Next up is the RS-422 Railgun, and this is a gun that you can charge up and release for a lot of damage, especially if you have it on unsafe mode and charge up almost to the end. And versus the bugs, this is interesting, as of course the railgun used to be the meta in the very beginning of the game, but it did get nerfed and has slowly been getting buffs back to where it was. And I will say, it does now feel very powerful versus the bugs. Now, this isn't going to be much of a horde clearing item as it shoots one very powerful shot, but this is more for the medium enemies and up. And it's very nice. You can one-shot the spewers, and you can take the chargers and impale Impaler's out fast from the face. It can also do that classic charger leg armor stripping, which is a great way to get them weak and then finish them off with a primary. Of course, also Bile Titans are taken out pretty quickly from the face with this. This is just solid, and it can be a great way to handle the elites, so I will be giving it an A versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, there's only one thing I can say. The Railgun is back, baby. This thing really is amazing versus the bots. It's able to one-shot Devastators, Berserkers, and Striders when you have it in unsafe mode. But this will also stun, stagger, and wreck the Hulks pretty quickly as well. And you can even use this against the factory Striders. Ultimately, this just feels really great to use. It's accurate, it has enough bullets to clear the field of medium guys, and you only really need your primary weapon for the smaller ones. This is S tier versus the bots. Now for the FAF-14 Spear, which is a lock-on rocket launcher that only locks on to the highest level enemies. And versus the bugs, this is interesting. It will lock on to enemies like the Chargers, the Titans, the Impalers, and also the Brood Commanders, though I really wouldn't waste it on them. Now the thing with this though is you do need to be far enough away in order to give your rocket a chance to get the angle it needs to actually lock on. But if you do lock on correctly, you will get an automatic kill with one shot. And that's definitely awesome for sure, but I don't think it's as strong versus the bugs. As you do have something here that can really take care of the big guys easily, you also need to sacrifice a backpack slot, and you will still mostly need to deal with the horde, and this just won't really help with it. And given you need a little bit of distance, you might end up missing your shots. For me, it's nice, but it's not the best. I will give it a B versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, on the other hand, the spear is hands down one of the best things you can have with you. This auto locks onto the biggest enemies, and it takes most everything out with one shot. It one-shots the Hulks, the tanks, the turrets, gunships, fabricators, and Striders, although that last one I feel like might be a waste to use. But the best part here is you can do all of this from super far away without needing to aim. The spear also will take factory Striders out in 2 shots, although you do need to be careful where your target is locked onto, but still, this honestly feels amazing to have on you. I love that you can clear out elites from afar. This gets an S versus the bots. Next up is the GL-21 grenade launcher, and this will lob grenades at your enemies, causing these high damaging explosions, and it does have a pretty fast fire rate as well. And I will say this just so happens to be one of the best things you can have with you versus the bugs. The explosions will take out multiple bugs at once, making it very easy to thin the herd, but this can also be good for utility and do things like close the bug holes. But this is also good for chargers, being able to explode their butts even by shooting under them to take them out from the front. And impalers are also taken out very quickly. The main struggle of this is you do need some range so you don't explode yourself, and it's not going to be something good for shriekers as you do need a little bit more precision. And the other thing is the Bile Titan can be taken out, but it's not super efficient with this thing. Regardless though, this excels at what it is for, and it just feels so great to use and so great to just clear the field with this. It's going to get an S tier versus the bugs for me. And versus the bots, this is still pretty solid. What I love about this is it will wreck everything at the Devastator level and down, and the splash damage just gets these guys out very fast. It also has great utility doing things like taking out the fabricators. Of course though, it won't be the best for the elites, although it still can work. But I still love this for being able to clear the smaller guys out very well, because it really does help clear a lot of the mayhem that goes on during these bot missions. I will be giving it an A versus the bots. Next up is the LAS-98 laser cannon. And this is essentially a continuous laser beam that you can emit from this cannon that damages anything in its path and sets those things on fire as well. And versus the bugs, this certainly does melt the smaller bugs very quickly. And bugs do happen to be particularly weak to fire damage. But versus a lot of the bigger bugs, it does feel like it takes a while to take them out. And I think my main problem with this is really the single targeting. You do need to wind up and hold on to one target at a time in order to really take anything out. But when you're facing off against the horde, you're constantly trying to move, and you often want to have things that's going to deal with a lot of different enemies at once. The solution here would naturally be to move around, beaming as you go, and move some more, getting some of these bugs on fire and continuing to stay mobile. But considering you do need to get sustained damage to really take enemies out efficiently, I find it to be quite slow and make it so each enemy just needs a little bit too much focus. I know there are some beam fans out there, but I am not one of them. them, and at least not for the bugs, this will get a C tier from me. Now versus the bots, I actually think the laser is pretty solid. Infinite ammo definitely helps, as well as being able to use this to snipe enemies from afar. It can also take Striders, Devastators, and Berserkers out pretty quickly and easily, and it even does good work of the Hulks and even the gunships. You can take a Factory Strider out with this, but it's not going to be the most efficient. All in all, I do think it's fairly solid versus the bots, so I will be giving it an A. Next up is the ARC-3 Arc Thrower, which essentially is an infinite ammo lightning arc throwing gun that chains lightning to multiple enemies. And versus the bugs, it's actually pretty good at managing the horde. The arcs jolt around from target to target and does so by arcing to a good number of targets, as well as at a longer distance than the arc blitzer. This has infinite ammo, which is definitely a plus, and it can also kill every single bug, although it isn't the most efficient for the elites such as the Charger, Impaler, or Bile Titans. One thing I do love about this is you can use it to stun lock a Charger, rendering them pretty useless for a while. The main drawback of this, I think, is the time between shots, which can allow for enemies to close that gap, and unlike the Arc Blitzer, which does allow you to just hold down the fire button, here you will have to fire each shot individually and make sure to time it right so you can keep firing. Still though, this feels pretty solid, and so I'll be giving it an A versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, I actually really like this because it has infinite ammo, of course, and you can use this to perpetually stun multiple enemies while also dealing damage to them, arcing from enemy to enemy. But what brings this even higher for me is that you can use this to stun and kill the Hulk, making them basically useless, and being able to use this while freezing up multiple very deadly enemies all at the same time. It just makes you feel untouchable and makes you feel much more safe. Now one thing is, it will take a long time against the Factory Striders, but given how well it does against everything else, this is still very solid. In general, I think this is pretty amazing versus the bots, and I will be giving it an A. Next up is the LAS 99 Qasar Cannon, and this is another anti-tank which does the same damage as the EAT and the Recoilless Rifle, and is pretty similar to those with their own pros and cons. In this case, this has a charge up time that you need to undergo before being able to fire, but this will auto reload your shots for you just after a good deal of time. The charge up on this thing can be tough because you do need to slow down in order to do this, and you need to hope your enemy doesn't change course too much. And of course, the cooldown does mean you need to wait a good deal before you're ready to fire again, but the auto reload is very nice, allowing you to run around for a bit before getting another chance. And I think that's particularly helpful versus the bugs because you do often need to stay mobile and you won't really have a ton of time to reload. For me, this is actually my preferred anti-tank out of the three options, but I do recognize it has some drawbacks and it lacks some of the versatility that the EAT has, so I will give it an A. Now versus the bots, I really love the Qasar Cannon. For the auto reloading, it's very useful, allowing you to focus more on moving from place to place than finding a spot to reload. This has the ability to one-shot the Hulks and the dropships. It can take out tanks pretty well, take out the Factory Striders pretty well. The main downside is really the wind up on this thing can be tough, especially when getting fired upon, but you can do so just in time behind cover and it will be fine. I also love the infinite ammo here, meaning I can try to snipe things from afar, and even if I happen to miss, I can just wait for the cooldown to be over and do it again. Honestly, I really love this versus the bots. I'm going to give it an A. Now for the TX41 Sterilizer, and this is an interesting one. This is not something you really want to take with you in order to deal damage. Rather, this is going to be more so of a defense type weapon. It's basically a flamethrower, but instead of flames, it shoots out this toxic spray, which will cause corrosive damage as well as confusion. And this can be great for getting the horde off your back, especially because the confusion can cause the enemies to fight each other and lose sight of you. It can also work on chargers too, although it does seem like they do need quite a bit more spray in order to kick in, but it can be kind of funny as you can feel like you have a pet charger now. Now, this isn't going to work too well on the Bile Titans, but I do like how this can make you feel pretty untouchable versus the horde, although you will need to be able to switch to something with some good damage after spraying enemies in order to wipe them out. The thing though is, I would say the dog breath stratagem may ultimately just be a better option than having this, because it will just spray the enemies automatically and allow you to focus on dealing out the damage. But I do think it can be okay versus the bugs. I will give it a B. Now versus the bots, the Sterilizer is pretty bad. This thing can do a decent job confusing and distracting enemies for a bit, and that can provide a little bit of respite for you, but that's about it. It also feels like some of the enemies, maybe because a lot of them have medium armor, that it does seem to take a bit more toxic gas in order to get them in this state, and doesn't feel like the confusion lasts too long. Coupled with the very low damage, not to mention that you do need to get close range, which isn't very fun when you're facing off against the bots, it just doesn't really feel that great. So this is getting an F tier. This is very poopy versus the bots. But with that, we have our lists. This is my tier list for the support weapon stratagems versus the bugs, and this is the support weapon stratagem tier list versus the bots. But what do you think? How would you rank these support weapons? Let me know down in the comments, and I want to say a special thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.